Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Per a poll I posted on my YouTube community hub, I have decided to discuss the current controversy surrounding the movie Cuties, and let me get a few yes and no questions out of the way up front. Yes, I will be using visual elements from the movie. This is a critique after all, and fair use applies. Yes, this also means that it is highly likely that Netflix will attempt to file a DMCA strike on this video, or at the very least a Content ID claim. Also, yes, I retain offline originals of all videos that I create, and no, I will not show the suggestive content within this video. Even a glimmer of that, and you can bet that the YouTube overlords would come down on my channel with all of the force of an avenging god and destroy my channel as a result. This movie is apparently fit for Netflix, but the content contained therein certainly does not conform to YouTube guidelines. However, I will not be focusing solely on the more unethical elements of the movie, and I will be critiquing it in its entirety. Also, being the bloody algorithm absolutely hates my channel right now, if you find merit in this video or in my channel, I would ask that you please remember to smash that like button like it's your most hated politician's face, leave a comment, and if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. The main story follows along the 11-year-old girl Amayel, a Muslim girl along with her younger brother Ismail and their mother Miriam. The movie immediately sets the tone and stage for the story with a prayer group style meeting where a woman is preaching to the others that, and allow me to directly quote the movie here, women must be pious because in hell there will be many more women than men. That is why we must heed the word of Allah, our God, for we are precious in the eyes of Allah. Where does evil dwell? In the bodies of uncovered women. Therefore, we must strive to preserve our decency, we must obey our husbands, and we must fear God when we educate our children. A very common statement to hear in Muslim doctrine, however, it is used here to showcase that what the girl ends up doing flies directly in the face of her family's beliefs. This story, as it is told throughout the entire movie, seems to me to be focused on Islamic oppression of women and how, while the adult women painfully accept their role within Islam, the young Amayel seems to be struggling with that oppressive life. However, a bit of forewarning here, that message is completely lost within this movie due to it being completely overshadowed and drowned out by the group of 11-year-old girls and their, well, inappropriate behavior. Amy then immediately encounters one of the cuties, Angelica, another 11-year-old girl dancing in tight black leather pants before running away. And so far up to this point in a coming-of-age story, which is what Cuties is apparently intended to be, at least that's what people are saying, it's fairly bog-standard and rather banal and bland in its storytelling. Fast forward a few moments and we're introduced to the rest of the cuties as they conduct a freeze mob at school for reasons, I suppose. My guess here is that this is intended to be presented to the naive Amayel as these girls are being creative, expressive, and cool, being in stark contrast to her restrictive upbringing. Now, within this movie, it is worth noting that there are some scenes that I personally thought were well done. Not many, mind you, but a few. Such as when Amayel was attempting to dance in her room with her shirt tied in a knot. When her mother and grandmother come along, she attempts to undo the knot as that would be seen as her dressing extremely inappropriately by her family's standards and, failing that, dives under the bed to prevent the adults from seeing her dressed in what I would imagine they would call an impious manner. And because of this, she finds out through her mother calling people that the mother Miriam's husband is taking a second wife. Here we hear Miriam breaking down once she gets off the phone and begins sobbing, hitting her head with her hands repeatedly in frustration as the young Amayel silently cries under the bed. And credit where credit is due. I found this scene to be extremely well done. It was simple, it didn't require much by way of acting, but its simplicity lent it weight and it felt very organic in its execution. And as this is one of the very few compliments that I'll be able to afford this movie even for a single scene, I'll let him have it. In stark contrast to this life, Amayel is once again presented with the cuties in the grocery store carrying on and chasing each other in what is supposed to be a carefree moment, reinforcing the attempted impression that these girls are clearly everything that Amayel is not, and their actions and behavior seem to captivate her. On the way home, she comes across the girls again and spies on them as they are working on a dance routine where, once the blonde girl notices her, they begin throwing rocks until one hits her in the forehead while she stupidly looks on. There is not much to this scene, but it's one of those bland world-building moments. I have to say that while this movie does have some, rather very few, but some well-done scenes, the majority of the movie is exceptionally dull and just uninteresting in the extreme. And to be honest, the girl Amayel is not a good person at all to my mind. And once we get through this, I'll give a full breakdown on why. And this is one scene to be kept in the back of your mind. It is Amiel stealing her cousin Samba's phone without a second thought. Eventually, Amiel does end up making friends with Angelica immediately following the cuties convincing Amiel to go into the boys' bathroom to record footage of some boy's junk as he's taking a leak, completely abandoning her once he realizes what she was attempting to do. Next, we have Amiel and Angelica bonding in the tried and true universal language of all children, consuming large quantities of sugar, followed immediately by them introducing the viewer to the so-called competing dance team that are rarely mentioned and also rarely seen, the Sweetie Swags, performing a dance routine where at the end one of the girls performs an accidental nip slip. Girl must have been a Twitch streamer in real life. And because of Amiel's stolen cell phone, which is better than the blonde girls, the girls agree to allow her to record their dance routine to post them to social media. Amiel then teaches herself the dance routine from the video, along with entertaining herself with some rather more mature music videos in secret during prayer meetings. This is, to my mind, an attempt to show that Amiel is secretly attempting to move away from her constraining family life and is becoming even more enamored with what else the world has to offer, even if all the external information she's consuming is exceptionally inappropriate for a girl of her age. Again, I can't stress enough that this movie is not created in order to be entertaining, and it shows. This movie was created to impress through its supposed artistry as opposed to viewer appeal. And in one extremely rare, actually entertaining moment, we see Amiel's mother bring her the phone as her father was on the line. Amy listens to it for a moment, clearly angered at the prospect of him taking a second wife, before doing the one thing in this movie that managed to even so much as elicit a smile on my face in amusement. And her mother's facial expression was just something I found funny. However, this movie is filled with rather inappropriate moments moving forward, such as this scene where one of the girls finds used protection in the park and chooses to blow it up like a balloon, saying, "Hey, look, it's a boob," just so they could have a moment of a sad girl saying, "But it's not my fault, I didn't know what it was," with a single tear. And it's just so tiring and contrived at points, like where this girl is attempting to DM the same boy that Amiel had tried to get an explicit picture of, where one of the girls, Yasmin, turns on the webcam in order to mess with Angelica, so the movie would have an excuse to drop Yasmin and create an opening for Amiel to join the group, having learned their dance routine. And then Amiel starts performing twerking to Angelica immediately after, showing that she had learned the routine, where Angelica enjoyed it, so Amiel then begins teaching twerking to the rest of the girls in a music montage that was understandably childlike and yet still rather uncomfortable in nature. And even though this was tame in comparison to the ending of the movie, I refuse to show that footage here, as such things would be more than enough for YouTube to delete my channel. Of course, the girls hold their audition for the obligatory dance competition, but are angered by Amiel not showing up due to her family forcing her to work cutting an ungodly amount of onions up in preparation for her father's pending wedding, where the door to the audition room was locked, but Amiel looked on through an interior window to view the routine. Now, the rest of the story really doesn't even matter, as it's basically left unresolved, so let's fast forward a bit so I can point out a few things, such as why Amiel and the other girls just aren't good people, particularly Amiel. After the girls sneak into a laser tag place and get caught, and the guy attempts to detain them to get their parents' phone numbers, they accuse him of attempting to grope them and of being a kitty diddler. She steals a bunch of money from her mother and buys herself and the other cuties a bunch of skimpy clothes. When Samba discovers that Amiel had stolen his phone, she begins to slowly undress herself in a suggestive manner until he shoves her away in disgust. She then snatches the phone, locks herself in the bathroom, and posts a picture of her privates on social media. And I have to ask this of the writers and or the director. What in the hell kind of purpose did this serve within the movie? What were they thinking in depicting an 11-year-old girl who, upon being discovered by Samba to have committed a crime and stolen his personal property, she then begins to, for all intents and purposes, to attempt to offer herself to him? It beggars belief, and it was extremely uncomfortable to watch. Also, several days had gone by at this point after Samba's phone was stolen. Why in the hell did it still work? Surely he would have replaced it or deactivated the device by then. Perhaps the city has free Wi-Fi? Also in that scene, Samba states to Amiel, "You said you couldn't find it," upon his realization that she had lied, which is a conversation that did not take place within the movie, and perhaps it was something that wound up on the cutting room floor along with this movie's dignity. But this sort of thing is not uncommon within this movie, where it expects the viewer to either not notice or pay attention to such things, which is, to my mind, sloppy. The next day, a boy slaps her backside as she's called to the front of the class, claiming she deserved it for posting nude photos of herself, where she then snatches up a pencil and stabs him in the hand with it. Afterwards, the girls drop Amael from the group and bring Yasmin back, where, the day of the competition, Amael lies in wait for Yasmin to walk by specifically in order to push her into the river and take her place, pausing when she sees Yasmin can't swim, standing there blank-faced and silent as she watches her struggle before the girl manages to grab onto a buoy. But I have one question, being Amael stood there apathetically as Yasmin struggled, clearly intending to get Yasmin out of the way so she could take her place, which is just a bit mental and deranged in my opinion. What if the buoy wasn't there for Yasmin to grab onto? Well, if that were the case, then it would be my guess that Yasmin would have drowned right then and there, with Amael looking on stone-faced and unmoving. Well, we've already seen that Amael is a selfish individual, given her stealing without thought or guilt, and the expression on her face absolutely sold me that this person just doesn't care what happens to others, as long as she gets what she wants. And then comes the big moment, and the primary source of the controversy, the final dance. And apologies, but there's no way in hell I'm going to be showing that on screen. To call it uncomfortable would be one of the biggest understatements I've ever said in my life, and it is the primary reason that I'm here right now recording this. Because this scene stands out as the primary defining moment above any other suggestive moments within the movie, of which there are more than a few, as being 100% unadulterated pedo bait. Now, I'm glad that I posted a poll on the community hub asking if people would be willing to hear what I had to say on this matter, because one of the commenters reminded me of the DOST test. And what is the DOST test? Well, per Wikipedia, the DOST test is a 6-factor guideline established in 1986 in the United States District Court case United States v. DOST. The case involved 22 nude or semi-nude photographs of females aged 10 to 14 years old. The undeveloped film containing the images was mailed to a photo processing company in Hollywood, California. And the criteria of the DOST test primarily falls under 6 categories. So let's run through the DOST test for this movie and see how Cuties stacks up. Point 1. Whether the focal point of the visual depiction is on the child's genitalia or pubic area. And in this, within segments of the video, or the movie, particularly in the final dance, this is a qualitative yes. In the visual depiction of the girls dancing, not only does the camera quite often focus on their posteriors and genital areas, the girls' dance moves as well as hand positions serve to directly call attention to the pubic region. Point 2. Whether the setting of the visual depiction is sexually suggestive, i.e. in a place or pose generally associated with sexual activity, which not only are the girls twerking, which is specifically defined as dance to popular music in a sexually provocative manner involving thrusting hip movements and a low squatting stance, their poses and finger biting while making use of the old-fashionedly defined term bedroom eyes, meaning that yes, their actions were very clearly sexually suggestive with poses that are indeed generally associated with sexual activity. Point 3. Whether the child is depicted in an unnatural pose or in inappropriate attire considering the age of the child. Considering during the end dance, along with most of the other twerking scenes shown, the girls, particularly Amael, pose in very wide, almost splits-style stance, face full-on to the camera in order to call attention to her groinal region. Point 4. Whether the child is fully or partially clothed or nude, and I would think extremely skimpy and form-fitting clothing would classify as partially clothed. Then point 5. Whether the visual depiction suggests sexual coyness or a willingness to engage in sexual activity, which this also tails off what I said with point 2 of the suggestive looks into the camera with the nail biting and the hair pullovers would certainly qualify as quote-unquote sexual coyness, along with the scene where the 11-year-old girl was attempting to offer herself to her much older cousin. And lastly, point 6, whether the visual depiction is intended or designed to elicit a sexual response in the viewer. And this one is somewhat up for debate, as it boils down to the director's intentions with having the girls perform in this manner. One could easily make that assumption at face value, however, there is also a possibility given Amael's cousin Samba's reaction to her attempting to provocatively undress in front of him, as well as the crowd's reaction during the final dance, changing from cheers and excitement to a mixture of confusion and boos before finally settling on near total stunned silence, while also showing one mother in the audience attempting to shield her own daughter's eyes to underscore that this just wasn't right, and follow that off with Amael stopping dead in the dance, begin crying, and then ditching the girls for probably the most unimpressive and bizarre ending to any sort of movie that I've ever seen in my life. One could argue that the director's intentions were to show that this was wrong. And if so, then point 6 would likely fail. However, it is worth noting that not all points of the DOS test need to be fulfilled, and given we are at an easy 5 out of 6 with a huge question mark hanging off of the last one, these scenes within this movie would very easily meet the definition of lascivious. But that's not entirely my opinion on that either. There's actually case law within the United States that helps set precedent in this, like the 1994 United States v. Knox case where it was found, per MediaCoalition.org. On June 9, 1994, the Third Court of Appeals ruled in United States v. Knox that non-nude depictions of minors can be prosecuted as kiddie porn. And within that case, it was worth noting that it involved girls dancing or gyrating in a sexually suggestive manner, much like here with Cuties. But that's all legal stuff, and 1, I'm not a lawyer, and 2, I'm quite certain there is much more information out there surrounding such a legal topic than I'm currently aware of, and as that is the case, I wouldn't even begin to fathom if Cuties violates the law or not in terms of the lascivious nature of the content. Make no mistake, it is lascivious in nature, and when people were claiming this was pure pedobait, they were not wrong. In terms of the rest of the movie, I could absolutely see what the director was attempting to go for within the movie in regards to Islamic oppression of women, and there were moments, as I said, that were well done, but those were, to my mind, too few and far between. But it could have been done equally as well, if not better, without the sexually suggestive content of 11-year-old girls. The inclusion of that was, to my mind, merely for shock and awe value, coupled with an attempt at portraying how 11-year-old girls tend to misunderstand such concepts, as it is all so very new to them, and it can be frightening, emotionally trying, and frustrating, especially when compounded with so many other events taking place within one's life. And yet, that confusion, that frightening aspect, that frustration doesn't come across at all within this movie. The execution was poorly handled, and the result is a movie that pedos will flock to and attempt to defend to their dying breath. The story was ultimately unrealized. Its core elements showed promise, at least at the conceptual level. However, the majority of ideas and concepts contained within the film fell completely flat. This was largely in part due to the directors attempting to push through the key plot elements in order to focus on the dancing. It's surprising to say considering the general plotting nature of the film itself, but the story arcs were rushed and pushed through instead of being allowed to develop in a more natural way. It's an odd mixture of getting a great deal of concepts completely right while allowing an equal number of their concepts to fall flat or to come out of nowhere only to disappear again just as suddenly, and to have all of it so completely overshadowed by the sheer discomfort and disgusting nature of 11-year-old girls attempting to sexualize themselves to the audience. And the movie's ending sums up how disjointed the entire movie was. You see Amiel freeze during the performance as you hear some voice singing in Islamic as she begins crying. She runs home, gets chewed out by her grandmother. The mother tells her to leave the kid alone. Amiel asks her mother not to leave her, which, where in the hell was that in the movie? And her mother tells her it's okay for her not to go to her father's wedding. We're then presented with the two sets of clothes side by side on the bed in a hammy and lame attempt to suggest that Amiel had decided to choose neither path and go her own way, and then she goes out into the street to play jump rope with this goofy camera rise where each jump she gets higher up to meet the camera angle with her looking happy. Which, good lord, this movie. Even laying aside and ignoring the pedo bait that it is, it was absolute crap, and this ending was a perfect exemplification of that. In a coming-of-age story, which is what so many are attempting to claim that it is, there is a lesson learned, missteps and actions that have ramifications attached to them that aid in the character coming to a deeper understanding of who they are and what they want to become. There were no repercussions for anything that Amiel had done. She lied, she stole on multiple occasions, she stabbed a boy, and she very nearly killed one of her classmates merely to get her out of the way. And she, as an 11-year-old girl, attempted to offer herself to a much older cousin, to say nothing of her posting her genitalia on social media. She was never made to suffer the consequences of her actions, and because of that, she had ultimately learned nothing. But the pedo bait is something that cannot be ignored, and it has not been understated. This movie is repugnant and revolting, and I honestly don't feel comfortable continuing my Netflix subscription as a result. And I know that there will be a ton of people that will be quick to type, but you forgot about this. So here's the thing. This movie was originally created for the Sundance Film Festival. the same Sundance Film Festival where its co-founder Sterling Van Wagenen was sentenced for diddling kitties in July of last year and was reportedly unapologetic for his crime. Although people should also bear in mind that Wagenen had not been involved with Sundance for more than 20 years. While I know a great many people want that connection to Sundance pointed out, I feel it's a bit of false framing considering it has been nearly a quarter of a century since Wagenen was involved with the Sundance Institute. However, where movies featuring a large amount of pedobaits are involved, kitty diddlers will be soon to follow. And my final verdict would be that if my channel had a Dirty Directors category, the creators of Cuties would beyond a shadow of a doubt qualify. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. I'll see you next time.